Okay, hope everyone had a great lunch. Thank you so much for coming to the session. I know there's been problems with Wi-Fi, so some of you may not know this is going to be about Power BI. So there will be no GP today. And some of you, yay. So thank you. Today, there's going to be one main focus, and it's going to be about basically your ABCs of a Power BI model. First off, my name is, we'll go through basically the most important components of what are we talking about with building a framework when you build and building a process for every report. And we'll talk about those components from the query editor to visuals. What's important, what is a routine and process you should always have in place. So first, just a quick thing about myself. My name is Tommy Puglia. I live in Chicago. I lead the Chicago Power BI user group downtown. So if you are ever in the downtown and you want a good slice of pizza, we also usually bring food. We're Illuminati's group, so, and for those who know Chicago, that's funny. For everyone else, it's kind of like Auburn, Alabama. You either choose Illuminati's or Giordano's. I'm also Italian, if you can't tell as well. Anyways, so also I have the really great honor of being a Microsoft MVP and being able to work with Chuck Sterling, some of the amazing people to, where a lot of this comes from. So enough about me. Let's get into the basics of what we're talking about with ABC and this components. We're going to thank Alec Baldwin. He's from New York. I'm also from New York. There's a movie that came out. Who knows what movie this is from? Who can raise their hand and know exactly what movie this is from? Show of hands. I saw 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is obviously not the sales group. So this movie's from this is a scene, a very famous scene from a movie called Glengarry Glen Ross. The basics of this scene is Alec Baldwin coming into a car salesman group. The car salesmen, they don't really care about what they're doing. He's upper management, upper sales, and he comes in and basically tells everybody to always be closing, the ABCs. This scene transformed the sales culture around the nation. Books were written about this always be closing. If you worked in sales, you probably had a poster that said always be closing or ABC at your sales team. Projects and blogs and white papers, you can look it up, ABC sales, and you will find how this transformed the culture to have a mantra and a mindset for anyone who worked in sales. This was their purpose. When they woke up in the morning, they poured their some coffee, and that's what they thought about when they went to bed, to always be closing. So we're going to show the censored version of this. This is not after hours. So, and even if it was after hours, there's a lot in this. So we're going to show the censored version, and for the sake of, 1, it's a great scene, and 2, it kind of shows what that mantra does. So. And we do have volume, correct? Yeah. Oh, I thought the HDMI did that. Mm-hmm. Oh.
I'm going anyway. Let's talk about news is you're fired. The bad news is coffee got
nope.
All you've got just 1 week to regain your job, starting with tonight. Starting with tonight's sit.
Doesn't look like it.
Have I got your attention now?
I'm sorry? I think it's coming from the computer. Okay. Don't, honestly, at this point. It's okay at this point. So the good news is Actually, the great news is this: if you have the slides, which they did a great job with that, links included. So that's the really. I apologize about that, but I encourage you to all watch it. It's a really, if you like Alec Baldwin, if you liked Red October, it's the Alec Baldwin from Red October, not the one from 30 Rock. So basically, he goes in and he says, "Put the coffee down." It's super, again, a famous scene. As he's coming in, he's basically pulls out the white and he's always be closing. A, B, C, always be closing. Famous scene, transform the sales culture. So what we're going to do with this is we are going to flip the script. And we're going to go from always be closing to always be coding. Always be calculating, always be creating measures. The same way that a salesperson wakes up in the morning and thinks, I have to close, we have to think, I have to code. Any person, and my goal for the rest of this this session is for you to never, ever, ever drag a column and make that your aggregation, or use that on a card or a bar chart. There should never be a column that should ever be dragged and used as your aggregation. Everything should be a measure, explicit measure that we create. And this goes into the same idea of a model and a good foundational data model. So let's talk about real quick, why do models matter? What is a good data model? Some of you may have an extensive background in data models, obviously outside of Power BI, and understanding the dimensional table, the fact table. Some of you might have been tasked to do Power BI or been working at it, but do not have a DB or a DB admin background. That's okay. Power BI, Marco Russo, who's known as the godfather of DAX, said Power BI is not a report-based tool, it's a model-based tool. So regardless if you've done models in SSIS or you're just starting off in Power BI, understanding the Power BI data model and creating a process around that is integral to the performance for your consumers, the accuracy and trust. So let's talk about what is a data model in Power BI. The data model is the collection of tables, queries, relationships, measures, everything from Power Query to everything from DAX that makes up what your data is. It's your recipe and it's your cookbook. Was important to have a good data model to be able to backtrack, to understand that you can read your data model, that it's not a foreign language to you if you haven't looked at that report in a month, that you can easily take your steps back and you don't have to be like Indiana Jones hoping you don't run into a trap. Resilience to change is something that can be modified based on rules that change and business rules that change. So what makes a good data model? A good data model. They are reproducible. If you have a report for your sales team or your product team and it needs to be modified, you need different reports, you can take what you've created and easily copy or replicate a lot of it easily into another report to keep accuracy. At the end of the day, our job and what we are tasked with is to create reports, visuals, and data to help drive action for others, to change people's behavior based on the data that we are providing them. So accuracy, efficiency, and reportability is integral to that. They are organized, that you can talk to someone else on your team who does Power BI and walk them through your report and how you got to that number. There's no worse answer for us when someone says, how did you get that number? And you go, I don't know. Or this table, then this table, and then I did this kind of filter. We need to instill confidence in the people who are using the reports, and we need to have confidence in our own reports, that we know how we got to a number. They are efficient, that any good report, you should be able to get a cup of coffee, add your cream, have a few sips, sit down, and be able to have a refresh. Any report that you have to get a cup of coffee, go to Bar Louie, come back, and then your reports may be refreshed, you may have a problem. And again, they are accurate. So how do good models get complicated? We always start pretty well. So let me ask a show of hands. How many people have gotten a request from somebody else, created a report in an hour or two, and then published it, shared it with that person, and never opened that report ever again? It sat doormat. One person. And even that, there's always an update. Usually the answer is never. If you have a team and you work for the sales team, especially sales, I can rephrase that question to how many people create a report for sales and they said, we're good? Probably never. So we have to expect all the time to go back as a creation of reports to modify, that we're going to have to backtrack. But you know why? Because business rules change. Scenarios change. Oh, this guy's not on this team anymore, or we don't sell this product anymore. We don't want to show it after this previous year. Okay, how can you go back and be able to modify that in a report? We should always expect, even if someone says, no, I just want to see the number once, or just ad hoc. Never go into any report with that idea. Always go back into, I need to create something that I can reproduce and backtrack. Because the thing is, simple reports are just that. They're very simple. You might start with a table. Oh, that's neat. You have 2 bar charts. That's great. And it has maybe 3 tables. Your relationship is super pretty. You're like, neat. It looks like a butterfly. How nice. And you have a measure, sum. Great. Numbers are accurate. But whatever starts like that never ends like that. Because this becomes this. Because you almost, it's like, what would be great if you actually added geographical data for our customers based on where they were in 1998. Okay, oh yeah, okay, And that has happened to all of us. We go, first you think, do you really need it? And then you go, okay. And then we might have a few more dependencies because now we have to hack something together and create something that never existed. And then these measures, Joe wasn't on the team, so we don't want to include him, but we only include him certain times. So no, we no longer have fresh measures. And also, can you add some predictability in there? What does that mean? Just do it. Okay. So now we have something where we're adding a little more complication to a report. So there's a gap between a good model and a bad model. Bad models hurt because you cannot backtrack. You become Indiana Jones hoping you don't step on a booby trap, and you really hope you saved your report. You really hope there's some version history on that. It's prone to inaccuracy. Again, you might have the report, you create it, and someone goes, well, shouldn't the number be 10,000 or 1 million more? And you're not sure. And you're not sure how to audit this. You're not trying to go back and test this. They are slow. They are slow. If you have to create a measure, you dread having to add another table to the report because you fear it may break your computer and your mouse at the same time. But good reports make you better as a professional and make your reports better. They are flexible to edits and new assignments. They help with being able to audit your data, to be able to go, okay, is this the right number? You know the steps you need to take to validate and do Q&A on your data and your reports. So let's talk about standards of a Power BI data model. It's important to note, just like if you were to do this in Tabular or SSIS, everyone has a data model. Power BI is a distinct data model that we're going to talk about today. And there's really 3 sections of the Power BI data model. There's the query editor, there's the data viewer DAX, and finally there's the report viewer design. A few things, and again, depending how long, let me just by a show of hands, how many people have been using Power BI for less than 6 months? How many people have been using it for less than 2 years? How many people have been using it since it was called Power BI Designer? I'm going to high five all of you after this. So for those who have been new, we all know the flow of how the data model works. We'd be able to connect to sources. We use it in a query editor. We do our recipe, our cookbook. We go into the report view, data, and visuals, create our relationships. For those of you who've really never used a data model or are still foreign to that, I'm going to go through the kind of components of a universal data models. The first thing we have is fact tables and fact and dimensional tables. Every report can be modified. Whether or not you got the data this way, you can modify the data to get your data into fact and dimensions. Fact tables are just that. They tell you the facts. If you had a report about baseball, your fact table would contain every pitch. It would be every action that was recorded. So it's your transactions, it's your sales, it's your units, it's your cost. It's usually where you're going to get your measures from. Then we have dimensional tables, or also known as dim tables. Just like in the same scenario as baseball, your dim table would be a unique record of every player, the player ID, which would be a unique record, the player's name, where they were born, how tall they are, etc. So your dimensional tables describe your facts. Usually the best way to do this is on your fact table, you have an ID like player ID, team ID, related to other tables that describe the team city, the ballpark they play in, how long they've been in existence, dimensions explain the facts. We combine this, and we do this through relationships and being able to filter. And the reason why we use data models this way is because then we don't have one table with 25 columns. It slows down a report, it's prone to inaccuracy, and it's very hard to change or update one unique record. With dimensional tables, we can update one record and expect everything else to filter that way. Power BI also has data types. And these are certain things of understanding what numeric, date, time, whole number, integer, percentage. It is important to note, and for those who have begun to dabble with Power BI with relationships, you cannot relate two different data types. And who knows, and I'll ask this, who knows where you have to change the data type in order for a relationship to work? What step in the process? Modeling? Who thinks it's different? Where in modeling? In the query editor or in DAX? Right. So in order for the data types to actually connect, if you want a relationship between two tables, you need to do it in the query editor. Power BI will not work with date, time, and date, even if you change the formatting. So understanding the data types is essential. So let's talk about what we must have in the Power Query Editor. And we're going to be talking about having naming conventions, organizing our queries, and relationships. So these are the same views. Here we go. Let's talk about some key takeaways from when we're in the query editor. First, before we open any report, define your scope. A lot of times we go into a report, someone says, can you give me sales for the last year? And we kind of pull in everything. This is not necessarily a Microsoft certified guide, but something that in my experience of me doing this has been proved very successful, and it helped me not shoot reports or my team in the foot. Is start with 3 questions when you get any report. What am I trying to do? What do I need? And what do I have? So if you need a report for the last 2 years of sales, write it down. I only need 2 years of sales. I need these columns. I need to be able to relate this. And then say, what do I need? Only pull in that information. So you don't have to pull in excess data. Excess data is the root of Power BI reports. This can help you so much on being able to only filter and look at a certain amount of data. Options and settings. Some of you may not know that in Power BI reports in the desktop, there's global options report and per report options. Now, they did update a little of this where for those of you who despise, can I get a show of hands of who despises auto date and time in Power BI? Let me see who's never heard of auto date and time. Okay, so for a few of you, basically if you ever load a report into Power BI, and it tells you, here's your year, quarter, and month, deal with it. It does it for you every time. You really just would like the date, please. And they're like, nope, that's auto date and time. I despise it, and I also despise Power BI being a matchmaker for me with relationships. So, because it never gets my relationships right, and the relationships between my tables, they always end early, and yeah. So anyways, there's a few options you can set per reports. One of them is saying disabling auto date and time. What do you do instead? Have a dim date table, dimensional date table that you can get your month and year and quarter. So, and it depends on your own process. These are things that I find that make the report easier. Also, if you have multiple dates in one table, auto date and time and also the auto date and time that Power BI does. If anyone's ever used Vertipack Analyzer, auto date and time or date and time slows down and consumes so much engine and calculation power of a Power BI report. So if you don't need auto date and time, if you already have a date table, turn this off because it will enhance your report automatically. So when we get into data sources, a lot of people ask, where should I do most of my optimization? Should I do a lot in DAX? Should I create a lot of relationships in DAX? Should I do it in the query editor, or should I do it in the, from the source? My recommendation is optimize query as early as you can. If you can do a group by in SQL as a native query, do it in SQL. If you can do a filter on a fact table and only bring in certain years, do it in SQL rather than the query editor. Rather than pulling in everything, because the way the query engine works when you're in Power Query can slow down everything because it still has to go back to the source. So the earlier you can do it in the process, filter, optimize. And again, only keep what you need. If you have to do filtering in Power Query, if you don't need those 5 columns that explain something you'll never use, don't bring it in your model. And always change your data types in the query editor and not in the model. When you're in the data view, that makes the formatting look better, but the data type is determined in the query editor. So we talked about optimizing queries, only keeping what we need, and data types and records. This is one that I don't think gets as much recognition or credit, but being able to optimize your naming conventions in Power BI. Power BI does not play the nicest with spaces or special characters, except for like pipes or underscores in the names. And it is not a requirement and will not break your report. However, being able to have a common naming convention helps you understand what data you're trying to look at, to know that you're pulling in the right columns when you're creating a report. And also when you're creating DAX, if you have spaces or special characters in the table name, you can mess up your DAX measures, and it makes it a lot more difficult to write and be in a process. Recommendations, and this is from Russo, this is from multiple people, try to avoid spaces in the column names. If you need space in the column names to make it more legible, do that in the table view where you can do that per visual because for your user's experience. But for ourselves, when we were beginning the model, try to keep everything consolidated. Try not to use too many codes like, EVCR. What's that? Oh, that's our evangelical volume, reconciliation unit. I don't know why I went with that, but basically, try not to have things that are too long. Try to use camel casing, so lowercase, uppercase. And keep a common naming order that if you name things a certain way, can be consistent. And again, have an idea going into your model what you're going to do. If you have a hierarchy, maybe tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, level 1, level 2, level 3. I fall into this trap when I'm creating groups, and I'll go, group product group, grouping product. And then I'm trying to go back in the report going, okay, which one goes first? So having an idea to create levels, and I'm sure we've all fallen into this trap. And again, it's also going back to when you're actually adding measures or creating measures and trying to reference a column, the naming convention will help you understand, okay, I need total sales, not sales amount. Understanding what the names are, especially if you do a lot of time intelligence. It also makes it easy to reference with IntelliSense. Sales year to date, units year to date, rather than having sales year to date and year to date units. Having consistent format. Organizing queries into folders. Some people don't know we can do this, but if you right-click anywhere in the query editor, you can very quickly organize all of your queries into certain folders. And you can go crazy with this. You can do folders inside folders. You can be the folder king. You can have as many folders as your heart desires. You can have 3 folders per query. I will keep harping on this because it is something so easy to do. Right-click in the query editor and say, create a new folder. They call it groups. I can do the whole spiel. Queries into groups, but they look like folders. Whichever way you want to do it, create groups to organize. Have a folder, have a group for your queries that you're development or testing. Have a group for the things that are in production. Have a group for your dimensional tables, and organize. Again, your user, the consumers will never see this, and you don't have to worry about what they're going to see. You can name the groups anything you want. But when we're trying to backtrack and create a routine, we know exactly where to go, and we don't have to click on every query and then wait for it to load. We know exactly where we need to be. Organize your data sources and having a convention for how your data flows. If anyone's used the dependency view in Query Editor, it's a great tool. Understanding the way that your data flows into Power BI. Now, I have multiple data sources. You sometimes have to do merges, transformations. but having naming. One of the best ways, and I think this was the BI accountant, a real famous blogger in the Power Query sphere, talks about this kind of model where you basically have every data source and you have base load queries. Because if you have to do a lot of transformations in Power Query, and basically creating staging queries that eventually become your production queries, and referencing. So if you have multiple queries that you have to reference and do a lot of transformations on, rather than duplicating the effort, doing it in one place, referencing that query as your production. Your refresh settings. Some of you also may not know that you can choose to refresh data sources only once or whenever you make changes or every time you refresh it. For a lot of dimensional tables, you don't need that loaded every time. For those who use KPI tables, you don't need this every time. And what I mean by that is you can basically say, load this table into the report, but don't refresh it. Only refresh it when I tell you to refresh it. So let's do a very quick view of the query editor and some of those components, and we'll go through some of those main important parts. So the first thing is I have in here, I have my groups and my folders. And as easy as being able to go here and say, I'm going to create a folder for this, move to group, I create a folder in a folder. All I have to do is drag that, and I'm going to load it in here. So now I have a nested folder, and I can even go here, and I can create a new group, and I can continue to do this. But what this does is allows me to, one, easily see everything in my data model in a very easy way. Now, some of these, this year, I have a column that's all of the years. I don't need this loaded or refreshed every time because the years are really not changing. Last time I checked, they change around once a year. So all I have to do here is when I right-click, there's Enable Load and Include and Report Refresh. And this includes what happens when you set it up with a scheduled refresh on the gateway. I just deselect the Include and Report Refresh, so I have my dimensional table, but it doesn't have to refresh. When I had 2020 in 2 months, it will refresh once, and then it doesn't, yes? It does not, because you're only telling it to load. It keeps the file because there's a file size to it. So the question was, we have this great in desktop, but when we publish this and publish this on a gateway, isn't it refreshing everything? And the question is not. I'll challenge you, have a report with a lot of tables and disable refresh on most of them, and then have another report that enables refresh on all of them. Track the time, because when you do the refresh history, it'll show you start and end time. There'll be a dramatic difference because this is part of the calculation. It doesn't need to go through that loading process. Obviously, it's going to do the same things in the DAX, the Vertipack engine, but in terms of Power Query, it's already done the recipe. It's not going to load that or refresh it again.
Is that a recent feature?
Should be since it's been out, since the gateway's been out. So. But it's refreshing the entire report, but it's not refreshing those individual queries. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the data types. Real quick, you notice that all of these have certain IDs. There is one that is you'll notice the integer here. If I change this to be text or a percentage number, you'll find that it can break when I'm trying to reference this to the year relationship. But it's always important to look here when you're looking at your data types, always in the query editor. Yeah. So let's talk about DAX. And this is where we're going to get into a lot of fun, and we're going to talk about some of the essential ideas with DAX. Whenever we load it into Power BI, after we do the loading, it's the first step for a new report is the review and revise. And what I mean with that is any new table that comes to the report, first, if you set the auto relationships to on, Review if there's any relationships that have been created. Again, I always like to disable, I love it to disable the auto relationships because I like one-to-many relationships. And I like to make sure that I know that there's not two cross-filtering directions. I know exactly what my data model looks like. So if Power BI is going to automatically create relationships, it can start to do some funky things with the numbers in your report. So review and revise, making sure that maybe this can be a request we all talk to Power BI together and we all say it at the same time, but whenever we load date into our report, it's always Wednesday, October 17th, 2019, the super long thing that nobody uses. Everyone changes that to 5/7/2019. So maybe if we all yell at the same time, Bill Gates will, or Microsoft will hear us, so they can change that. But going in and just formatting the data types we want. This also makes it easier if you're dealing with the dollars or currency for sales. If you change the formatting in the column, any measure you create off of that is going to know that, and it make it a lot easier to change every measure to currency compared to if you just had it as a decimal number. So going in, formatting, combing your report, giving that nice polish it deserves. Looking at default summarization. Power BI also loves to make our order IDs and our years to be summarized, which is a great thing, especially in your table going, wow, the year 5019 had a great year because it's summarizing every year, and it's very frustrating when we don't know it's doing that. Going in and doing that final polish on the report. For those who have no idea what I just said and said, I don't think it's 5019, I think it's 2019. Power BI will look at number columns and think, I should probably summarize this, or I should probably count this, right? This is the year. This is a year column, so this should definitely be summarized. If you go to the modeling tab, there's a way to easily say, do not summarize this. Never summarize this. Don't summarize my IDs. Please, Power BI, do not summarize my IDs. To go in and make sure that's all polished and ready to go before you add any visual to the report. And then showing and hiding things in the report view. Again, not a huge thing for consumers, except if they're doing Q&A, and you're creating all these test columns, and they're going, what in the world is, I hate my report as a column when they do Q&A. Not that any of us have ever written, I hate this, in a column, just to have fun, but maybe it's just me. But hiding columns or hiding tables that don't need to be there, especially if we have a good data model, we don't need all those fact ID, product ID and sales ID and customer ID in our fact table, because we're going to reference those other tables. It makes it a lot easier for us, again, rather than showing 15 tables and trying to go, I think it's this table. You know the columns that are showing because they're showing up when you hide columns in tables. And relationships. Understanding the relationships we have with the tables is essential. Always use dimensional tables. If you raise your hand and say, hey, Tommy, we have no dimensional tables at our company. They hate all the BI guys. The IT just hates us. Well, I am happy to say, create them. You can do this if you have data flows. If you ever heard of data flows, we are a data flow shop at CompTIA, where every reference table, every product table, every table about a certification is in a data flow. So everyone who's a BI creator is using the same source of truth for a referencing. You can do this in Excel. You can use Power Apps to write to a SharePoint list to be able to manage your sales teams and their territories and their commissions. But you can use a fact table from Power BI, reference the fact table, remove all the other columns, and then just basically create your own grouping in Power BI. I can't stress enough, find a way to create dimensional tables. They will save you so much time, energy, and it will enhance your report. I'll get to you at the end. So. And measures versus columns. And we're going to get into this, and we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Understanding when we create a measure, a calculated measure, or we create a calculated column. Just like we talked about before, if you can do it in the query, the closer to the source, do it closer to the source. If you have to create a column in DAX, fine. But if you can do it in the query editor, do it in the query editor. There's a lot of times that it doesn't make sense for us to do it in Power Query and that we should do it in DAX. But calculated columns can really slow down and be a lot more power on the engine. Foundation. Now, I'm going to skip over this because who uses Q&A at their company? Any Q&A at all? So a little known fact that just came out is there's a way to actually group measures or group columns into folders in DAX or in the report view rather than the query editor. You can basically create the same idea. We group all your measures together. So rather than having all your measures in 18 different tables, and it makes it very frustrating to try to find that one measure, that why is it always on the bottom? Maybe I should just name it AA total sales so it always shows up on the top, and then it looks terrible. You could actually group your measures into folders in DAX or in the Power BI. And then foundational measures. I'm going to go back to what we were saying before, and really everything we're talking about today is creating a standard, and that standard will begin and end with foundational measures. Any number, any visual, any bar chart, any table, any matrix, I will go through all the visuals, and I will say all 200 custom visuals. Any visual in your report should be a measure, a calculated measure that you have written with your own two hands and not have dragged. Why is this? Measures are the foundation of the reports. They link to everything. They understand relationships. They understand filter and context. If no one's ever heard filter context, if you've never heard of filter or evaluation context, now is the time to leave. Because if I tell you for the first time, everyone will be running away screaming in fear and horror. For those who know what filter context is, we all know the misery that can cause. But basically, in a nutshell, any DAX measure, anything that we drag to a visual is a measure in Power BI's mind. It's either implicit, which means we just dragged the total sales column onto the canvas view, or it's explicit, which means we explicitly wrote a measure, like total sales sum sales amount, or calculate, or year to date. All those understand context of the filters. There's been a lot of sessions already, and if there's probably a few more to go about DAX and the filter context. If you have not gone to it, if you're not familiar with it, I highly encourage that's what you do. Also, when you change, if you don't use a column, depending on the filters you're applying from outside references, whether it's a filter on the page or on the visual, can affect the numbers. So let's show an example. We're going to show an example of baseball and basically how much salary does someone contribute per home run. So if we pay a player $1 million and he hits 50 home runs, basically, or he hits 100 home runs, $1,000 per home run that he hits. Great. So that's the value that person is giving to me. Now there's a difference. Some players don't play all season. If anyone's a Mets fan, David Wright, maybe he's played 1 or 2 complete seasons. Baseball, when you look at most sports, they say there's a qualification. In order for you to qualify for certain numbers, you have to play a certain amount of games or a certain number of bats. In the case of baseball, you can qualify for batting average or slugging or ERA, or for batters, is for 3.1 at-bats per game the team played. So it's not important to know all of that, but it's important to know that there's standards in order for you to show up in the records as a league leader. So we need to be able to flag batters who have qualified for certain seasons and flag batters who have not. Because if we don't, we can basically say if someone hit 1 home run, they're worth 500, whatever their contract is worth, but they only played 2 games. So this is where DAX is going to matter. Let's say we have the following measures. We have a calculated column on the left, and that's basically saying if someone qualified. If you play 162 games, a batter will only qualify if they get a 502 at-bats, right? So we're basically saying if the batter per season hit times 3.1 is more than 502 or greater than, then great, they qualified. Then we create a measure that's saying dollars per home run. Total sale or total salary divided by home runs. Easy. There's no filter on this that's showing on the measure that's showing whether they qualified or not. So what are we going to do? If we're just looking at home runs, we now have on the left-hand side using a filter on the visual for home runs. And we're saying only show me qualified, right? The numbers more or less add up because we're saying the batter qualified equals true. That's what we have right here. The batter qualified is true. That's the filter we're doing on the left. On the right-hand side, we're actually creating a DAX measure that says calculate home runs, batting average, home runs divided by, or just total home runs, but the filter is saying it's true. Well, the numbers are exactly the same, so nothing looks different. But again, let's go a little more complex, and we're going to be actually dealing with 4 different tables: year, batting, salary, and player. Now, this is the part where everyone screams in horror usually. But on the left-hand side, we have dollars per home run, and then we have the filter on the visual saying the batter qualified is true. On the right-hand side, we have a DAX measure that's doing all of that for us. We're saying calculate, divide salary by home runs, but we're saying filter batting qualified is true. They should be exactly the same. In our head, these should be exactly the same. But because we're not being explicit about our measure, and we're not doing things in a foundational way, we notice that some of these people, the numbers do not add up. Michael Bourne, for example, you show the 4,500. He's not showing up for anything else, but the total numbers don't add up. For example, David Wright is showing me 2,500 for the year that he qualified. So the last year he qualified was 2014. Again, I'm sorry, Mets fans. But the total number is $7 million because it's counting all those other years. It's not understanding the filter context. It's not doing the calculation we expect it to. So imagine you have a report where you just have a bunch of filters on the side, and right now your number may not be accurate or may not be showing the way that you would expect to see it. How would we ever know this unless we had this calculated measure? So understanding there's an inherent difference between implicit and explicit. I'll show an example and I'll highlight David Wright. If you look at David Wright on the left, 25 million, but it shows you the 7 million total. If you look at using DAX, it's showing you 25 million and then 25 million for the total, the only year qualified. The numbers are starkly different, again, depending on what you're trying to do. The summary from the data view: A, B, C, always be coding, always be calculating measures. From our query editor to DAX, always create a process, always do things in a way that you know is optimal and as a professional. Organize, relate, and polish our formatting. No one wants to see a number that has no commas in it. I personally, as much as I despise auto date and time, I hate when a number equals 5 million and there's no commas. And to me, again, you can let Alec Baldwin talk about it with the language that he'll use. But that's how I feel about no commas in a report. Formatting to polish, only providing what we need, using logical, conventional names that be universally understood, not just by you, but by the consumers using it. Again, to kind of push the idea that this report's not for ourselves, it's to empower others to make decisions. And they need to have confidence in what they're looking at. So let's talk about real quick the report view or in design. And we have a little more time, we can do Q&A. So why is visualization so important? We might create the DAX measures, we have the organization, every name's great. But if we fail on some of those vital parts of the visual side of things, It's kind of like if a report falls in a tree, does anyone make a decision? In the very same way, no matter what we create, if we don't instill confidence and tell a story, communicate properly, then it doesn't matter what data and how accurate and how fast a report is. Microsoft actually has a really great white paper, but you can't download it. But I encourage you to say best practices, data visualization, Power BI, and look for this doc. It's very extensive, and it talks about everything, components from colors to naming to data types and data labels. I highly encourage anyone to look at this. Title naming and objects. So always naming things in a conventional way. Total sales by month, total sales per team member. Having a very conventional way of looking at it. And even our data labels too, because we can change that in the report rather than changing the column name. Adjust your page size. How many people like to do rolling pages, page scrolling? How many people despise it? How many people know that their consumers despise it? So even more hands for that. So there are use cases where we should do that, but from a report standpoint of view, and to be able to consume data, having a right layout, having a good, trying to avoid scrolling at all costs, and also doing fit to width or fit to page, making it legible to people and not making it too loud. Formatting, the colors. You have just as much as you can create nested groups inside groups inside groups. Power BI has basically given you no excuse to format your report and polish it to making it look as professional as possible. From the colors of titles to backgrounds to legends, making sure this is understood and accurate, that we're naming things the same way in every page, that we're using the same colors in every way. Anytime you show certification A, every report should follow the same color. There's a really great book about data viz, and I encourage you, if you don't have a lot of experience on data visualization, to look for the Amazon book. I think it's for Data is Beautiful, or I really encourage you to look into getting a book. It will change the way you create reports. Color themes. For those who are not using color themes, I am not going to ask anyone to raise your hand if you're not. I can't handle it. At this point, we should all be using a company or agency or firm color theme. It is so easy to do. You can go to Mike Carlo and Seth Bauer, who are located in Milwaukee, powerbi.tips. They have a report theme generator. You can easily find your company's brand guidelines, get the colors, put it into this page, and it will spit out a color theme for you that you can import in every report. There's the color data stories gallery and the color themes gallery that you can import the reports. Granted, Power BI did just come out with new default themes, so no one has to worry about that green that every report has, and everyone knows exactly what green I'm talking about. Anytime I've seen that green in a report, I just go, no. I go home. So always using branded colors. And these things, again, we're dealing with data 80% of the time, so we don't think this is as important. But for the consumers, the first thing they're seeing is the colors, is the names, is the visuals. And unfortunately, and I've heard too much, our consumers, they don't care how long it takes or how much data is behind it. They want a number to make a decision. And finally, custom visuals. If you've never looked into custom visuals, I really encourage you to look into them. They have over 200 plus. There's some amazing ones from OKViz. There's amazing ones that Microsoft's created that use R. So really look into the custom visuals. With that, I believe I am slightly over time, so I will allow everyone to go. But like I said, my name is Tommy Puglia. You can find me at Tommy Puglia on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I really hope this helped. I encourage you guys to give it feedback. Feedback is just like at everything, providing data. But thank you guys so much for coming. Have a great rest of the session, and I'll see you around.